Thanks for joining me, guys. Just wait just a few minutes to see how many, get a few more faces in here. Thank you for joining me on a Tuesday evening. While you guys wait, if you want to put where you're from in the chat, that would be awesome. Oh, let me double check that. Thank you so much. Okay, I think I fixed it. Thank you, Haley. I appreciate that. Also, ingenious way of communicating that to me. Thank you. Um, okay, I am going to get started just so that we all are on time. Again, thank you so much for joining me today on a Tuesday evening. I hope your guys' days are going well and the weather isn't too bad where you are. I'm a rainy day person, so I'm always feeling happy now. It's better than you're Northern Virginia here, so you know DC has been sweltering hot the past few months. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So thank you guys for joining us today for a conversation about the state of teacher preparation programs and how practitioners can help bring about change. Thank you also to Donna and the Science of Reading What I Should Have Learned in College Facebook group for giving us an opportunity to share this presentation. Teachers especially are kind of a new audience for NCTQ. Often we find ourselves talking directly to teacher preparation programs and state leaders and things like that. So this is new waters for us, and any feedback you can give is super helpful along the way. So my name is Christy Ellis. I am the Director of Special Programs with NCTQ. If you're unfamiliar with our organization, we are on a mission to ensure every child has an effective teacher and that every teacher has the opportunity to be effective. We do this by looking at two main areas. The first is what we are focused on today, which is looking at how teacher preparation is aligned to research-driven practices, which we do through publications like the Teacher Prep Review. And another side of our organization, which is less well known, is that we also look at how policies and practices at the local, state, and national level lead to the highest quality teacher workforce, specifically recruitment, assignment, evaluation, development, and compensation. As I mentioned today, we're going to be talking about our teacher prep side of things, specifically findings from the Teacher Prep Review release, the Reading Foundation Standard. So my personal connection to the subject, I think will sound similar to a lot of you. I started my career as an elementary teacher in Cleveland Metropolitan School Districts. I taught for around 4 years as a third grade teacher, where my primary placement was actually teaching reading to kids. And I also taught in Ohio, which has a third grade guarantee law, which I'm sure lots of other people may be aware of having in their state, where if students don't pass a specific test in third grade, they're not able to pass into the fourth grade. And this was basically the conversation of third grade at the time. And despite having no real qualifications in terms of my preparation, I went through Teach for America, which is an only about a 3-month training for alternative certification. And then it was a lot of on the ground work for the next 2 years. I was considered most qualified based on the licensure that I had acquired at the time. And like a lot of teachers, I had successes, I had failures. There were things I was great at. I have regrets still to this day about some things. But I'm sorry to say that I didn't even know the science of reading was a thing or a concept until I left the classroom and joined NCTQ around 5 years ago. And in my current role over the past few years, I've had the great pleasure of leading the project management side of the Reading Foundation Standard. So I've been able to meet and talk with a lot of reading experts and current practitioners who are experts in this field and learn so much about them. And what I've heard over and over again is that many of us who are now very passionate about this work have a very similar story, that when whatever training that we went through, we weren't trained very much in the science of reading. And that's pretty much the story of the teacher prep view on reading foundations as well, is looking at preparation is currently happening for teachers who are going into the classroom. And what we're going to do today is think about what can we do about it, and specifically what can teachers and practitioners do in their roles to think about how they can catalyze change in one of the most important roles of all as an advocate. So a few norms today, and then I promise my preamble will be over. I'm mostly going to be spending my time talking through the different findings that we had on the teacher prep review, as well as talking about what the teacher prep review is and how we got to our findings. Feel free to share any of your thoughts along the way in the chat. That should be open now. And we also have a Q&A that is open. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in at any time. We will have a Q&A section at the end, but I will try to address anything that comes up if I need to clarify anything. And I also want to shout out, we have a planned second webinar on October 5th, same time, 7 p.m., where I'll be joined with the lead expert on our standards, so the person who held all the scientific knowledge in her brain while we were doing the work, Linda Diamond, who is the co-author of the Teaching Reading Sourcebook, and a few other teacher practitioners, where we'll primarily be discussing how teachers have catalyzed change on the ground and sort of how to think through and go through that process in your school, the challenges you might face. Okay, so what is the Reading Foundation Standard? It's grounded by one core idea that all children deserve to read and all teachers deserve the preparation that enables them to help their students achieve this goal. We don't want teachers entering the classroom in the same position that I was in, where they have a classroom of 30 students who really, really need help and who have high stakes tests on their plate, and who have a teacher who don't know how to tackle that. And I know from my personal position, I was looking up frantically trying to figure out how can I help my students. And a lot of the materials I was finding, at least in 2015, were steeped in balanced literacy and whole language information, and definitely not the most effective resources out there. So giving teachers the knowledge and skills they need to teach reading effectively is fundamental for improving outcomes for all children and reversing historical patterns of inequity. We know from NAEP data and other sources, too many children aren't learning to read, and those rates of reading failure rise for historically marginalized students. I think we also know from being teachers and talking to teachers that teachers want to help. They want to have the information on their hands to do the best that they can for their kids, and aspiring teachers have that same want. So we want to make sure that we can close the loop here, and we're giving them access to the information that they need from day one. Reading proficiency, luckily, is starting to rebound a little bit after the pandemic, but there is still a long way to go. So we know how to help more than 90% of students learn to read, to learn proficiency with scientifically based reading instruction on phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. However, research from NCTQ and others has consistently found that teacher prep programs are not adequately preparing aspiring teachers in the core components of reading. So I'm curious about everybody else. I talked a little bit about my story. When did you first even hear the term science of reading? And I wonder this in terms of your years as a teacher, right? So I would say it's almost like year 5, but it was year 1 out of the classroom for me was the first time I heard what the science of reading was. Can you guys share? Does anybody have any different experiences of when they may have heard that term for the first time? Wait just a second. I will say one of the funnier things for me was that I happened to study cognitive science in college. And so I knew a lot about like what phonemes were and phonics and phonemic awareness, but I hadn't made that connection to how it worked in the scope of reading. So Holly says 7 years ago. So Hollywood, you were right at the turning point. I'm curious about too, like when in your teaching lifespan, if anybody has any short stories to share. Cindy's only heard the term recently, but teaching was consistent with what I'm learning now. That's great. That's excellent. I do think it's on the rise right now, which is really, really helpful. And you might actually also mean that when you were in school, you learned a more systematic and explicit way of learning to read. And I think I actually have a similar story that when I was in school, I remember big phonics and at least phonemic awareness focus, but not so much when I was being prepared to be a teacher. So what is the NCTQ? Oh, and Holly says she's been teaching 18 years and was a literacy specialist with a master's in early literacy, and she only heard it 7 years ago. And I think that really tells you exactly the story that we're talking about. So, and I think that that's one of the harder things to swallow too, is people who have that extended education, and they've went back to school and they've really invested a lot of time and energy into learning how to be a great teacher. And you still have to do some work on your own to find out what those things are. So I want to dive into what the specific reading foundation standard is and what we look for. We look for evidence for how programs prepare future teachers in the 5 components of scientifically based reading instruction: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. You guys might have questions like, okay, where does like something like phonological awareness fit in? And for the purposes of our standard, that would fit under phonemic awareness. And I believe things like word recognition also fit under vocabulary. And things like that were basically worked out with our advisory panel of experts who helped us determine sort of what the look fors were for these different components. And for each of these components, we review course materials for evidence from 4 instructional approaches. So instructional hours, which is the course time spent covering a topic; objective measures of knowledge, which can include test quizzes, exams, or graded written assignments; and practice opportunities, which can include field experiences or experiences administrating assessments, as well as background materials, which can include textbooks, articles, and other resources. For each component, programs can earn up to 3 points per instructional approach. There's a total of 12 points that are possible, but you only have to earn an A to reach that adequate marker. So how can a syllabus show evidence of the components? I wanted to provide some examples from real syllabi for you guys, because one common question we get when describing our analysis process is, how is a syllabus able to provide this information on how a component is covered? So I wanted to help showcase snippets from different syllabi to show how we're able to look for evidence and what it might look like in a syllabus. So when we're looking for instructional hours, here's a one class session from a longer list of class sessions. So typically it'll have the date, and then it'll have the topics that are covered. And so for this course, we can clearly see that there is at least one session about early literacy, phonemic awareness, and understanding phonological awareness. So that is how we would be able to provide cover for instructional hours for phonemic awareness. Looking at objective measures of knowledge, this is an example of a assignment description from a syllabus. So in this course, candidates develop a phonemic awareness lesson plan based on the results of a phonemic awareness assessment and teach it to her student at a local elementary school. The lesson plan should include various activities and instructional strategies to meet the diverse needs of learners. So this is an example of an objective measure of knowledge. For practice opportunities, it's the far right, the middle bold part is what would be credited for a practice opportunity. In this instance, they are given credit for having candidates practice administering and scoring a PAST. And for background materials, we look at a syllabus to see what are the different required texts or materials within there. And then we actually have a separate team of reviewers for textbooks and resources who we buy all of the different resources and all of the different textbooks that we see in the various syllabi, and we send them to different literacy experts who look through them and determine whether they are research-based or not. And I will provide a link to that. It's called the Instructional Materials Database, and we provide reviews of anything we found used in college courses. And I think it's also helpful if you by yourself or like, I'm curious about, for example, additional resources that might help me teach English language learners. You can like select a component and it will filter to show you a bunch of different textbooks that have research-based instruction on there. So We also have a second part to our standard, which, based on recommendations from our expert panel, we integrated analysis on the extent to which programs prepare candidates to teach three groups of students: English language learners, struggling readers, and students who speak language varieties other than mainstream English. That specifically means students who might speak a English dialect. So every person speaks a English dialect. I speak a dialect, you speak a dialect. But we specifically want to make sure that instructors have a greater understanding of what it means to teach students with dialects. So maybe you speak African American English or Appalachian English, Cajun English. There's many, many of them. And we want to make sure that this is an area that is also being considered and taught within teacher education programs. So all educators should be prepared to teach a range of students with diverse needs in learning to read. In the same way that we look at how programs cover the 5 components, we also look at the program's use of the 4 instructional approaches for these 3 populations. So we'll look at their class time, objective measures of knowledge, background materials, and their opportunities to practice. So moving on ahead, I'm going to be moving to our national findings. And we also have this lovely quote here from Alejandro Rojas Silva. When he was 7, we moved our son with dyslexia from a school district that did not adhere to the science of reading to one that did, and his academic and emotional life improved dramatically. Though well-meaning, the teachers from his original school simply did not have the tools to teach him. In the new district, where teachers leverage scientifically based reading instruction, our son, with time and intervention, learned to read and is now at the top of his class academically. I just think that that's basically what we all want, right? We all want to be able to make those transformative experiences happen for every single student that we have. So if you look at our report or our national findings page, there is some additional information that I won't be covering today, but I tried to hone it in on, I think, the things that are most important in terms of the group that we're talking to today. So while we know all 5 components are critical to developing strong readers, in the past decade of the teacher prep review, phonemic awareness is consistently the least addressed component. This time is no different. 2 of the 3 programs that we looked at are not adequately addressing phonemic awareness. And when we looked at where programs are falling short, most are not providing enough instructional hours or practice opportunities. So I want to do a poll real quick that I'd love if you guys could answer. In your teacher preparation, and this can be in your undergraduate degree, if you were alternatively prepared in your master's degree, did your teacher preparation program cover all of the components? And what I mean by that is, do you remember having a significant amount of learning about each of those components? I know for me, it would be a no. I don't think we covered any of the components in the training that I had. I think the poll should have popped up for you guys. And then I also want to read what Holly said in the chat, because I think it's super important. She said, I only learned about the science of reading when I did my own research on brain-based learning. It was not brought to me by a district or formal professional development originally. And that's so wonderful that you guys got an A on the regrade. I think that is also, yeah, if you have connections within a teacher preparation program and you know that they've been doing a lot of work, we're happy to take a look at materials again to make sure that things align. So I'm getting results from the poll. I think we have like 30% participation, and kind of looks like what you'd expect. We have about 75% no. I'm wondering in the chat, is there any components that you remember not being covered, or you think that just weren't a part of your preparation? I think for me specifically, it was, I remember doing a lot of comprehension based materials, but I think that was the extent of it. Feel free to add your answers to chat as we move forward. Make sure I'm keeping time. So another big thing that we look at is that nearly 1/3 of programs are not providing any practice opportunities connected to the core components of reading, despite widespread agreement among practitioners and researchers on the importance of practice. We feel it's intuitive. To get better, you should be practicing. Often programs are requiring candidates to practice teaching reading, but aren't setting parameters around the specific content of the practice lesson. So in the example that I shared previously, it seemed pretty clear that they were asking candidates to submit, for example, a phonemic awareness focused lesson plan, or they were asking candidates to specifically administer a PAST. A lot of times what we'll see instead of those specific teaching opportunities or specific practice opportunities is that programs will be having candidates do a semester-long tutoring, or they'll be following whatever the teacher is doing in that class, rather than having these specific aligned opportunities that allow them to engage deeply in the components. Another thing that we see often, which is less rigorous even than having those more loose opportunities, are opportunities where they are completing activities as if they are students. So they'll learn what an oral reading fluency exam is, but instead of administering it or scoring it, they will be taking it as if they're one of the students. Although we see this with word sorts a lot, and we really highly encourage programs to move into a model where the teacher candidates are acting as instructors. And Julie says that she had a lot of comprehension strategies. Holly also says that, and Cindy hasn't had a formal teacher preparation yet. I'm wondering, Cindy, are you, you've only been teaching homeschool and tutoring? Yes. So, but you said that you've had good science of reading materials. So that's excellent that you're steeped in the good stuff so far. So I'm wondering if these findings on practice resonate with you. When you were in your teacher preparation or when you were being trained, were you asked to specifically complete activities that were related to the components of reading, or were you asked to work within the teacher's classroom and follow what the teacher was doing? I personally, when I was in my training, I had a actual, she was actually really great. The teacher who I had worked with, the cooperating teacher, because about 2 weeks into my program, she was like, you need to be doing some phonics. And she like just gave me a bunch of stuff that she wanted to make sure that I was working with. And at the time I was like, but I don't know what this is. I'm confused by all of this because we hadn't been trained on that formally. But these were kindergartners. I was supposed to be tutoring kindergartners over the summer program. So thank goodness that she kind of put her foot down, knowing that what I had been asked to provide them wasn't going to meet their needs. So as we move forward, please put in the chat if you had any practice opportunities specific to the components of your training program. If so, what were they like? And if not, do you think that that would have been worthwhile? Now, this is a newer change to our standard. So if you were ever familiar with our standard at all in the past, you would see that we had not looked at this at all, but urging from our expert panel, as well as the survey of the field that we completed, we wanted to also integrate a piece of our standard that looked at whether practices that run contrary to the research were still embedded in these teacher preparation programs. And so with our expert advisory panel, we selected, I think it's around 10 different practices that research basically has found are not effective or are less effective than other practices and should sort of be moved out of teacher preparation currently. And what we saw looking at the entirety of the field was around 40% of programs still teach multiple of these practices. So the one that we see the most of by far is running records, followed by guided reading, assessments like DRA, IRI, and QRI. And around 15% of programs use balanced literacy and 13% use miscue analysis. We will say that in order to be given a like a mark on the program, which essentially they lose a letter grade if they choose more than if they use four or more of these components within their program. And the rationale behind that is that some things like guided reading or reader's workshop might be being used in a way that is not completely misaligned with the science of reading. But when they use the combination of four or more practices, it seems pretty clear that they are probably not leveraging research aligned practices within their programs. Um, it's pretty clear that things like running records may be heavily used in a lot of programs, but there are other opportunities that candidates or other practices that candidates should learn that can be more effective. Okay, so I'm going to send this out to everybody that's in this group, but I really wanted to make sure that I was including as many free resources as possible for people. I know that your group is all about resources and resource sharing, which is, I think, one of the most important things, especially when you're a teacher on the ground. So on the left side here, I have some just learning materials. So the first one, the 10 Maxims, what we've learned about teaching children to read, I think is a great one pager for advocacy work or just sharing with other people to show like this is what we know about how children learn to read and what children need to know. I mentioned the instructional materials database earlier. It is a database of all of the different textbooks that are currently used in instruction in a teacher preparation program. And it's also a great resource for anyone who's like, I want to brush up on what I need and what I need to know. And it's got lots of different filters for you to look for the different things that you might want. And also, I think there's two other things here that I think are specifically really interesting. The Rhode Island Science of Reading and Structured Literacy Resource Bank is a really, really awesome resource that has like it's got so many free links to different resources that are directly tied to different parts of how to read and how to teach reading. Definitely recommend that. And the last thing is this free reading activities and teaching tools. Linda Diamond shouted this out for me. Somebody basically put an entire free textbook, multiple weeks of instructional activities for teaching reading, and it's incredible. So I will send this out to everybody afterwards. And if you guys have any resources that you'd love to share, please put them in the chat. This is not only helpful for the people today, but I'm also constantly compiling these different resources so we can, send them out to people as much as possible. This is one of my passions because, as I said, when I was a teacher, I was constantly like Googling, trying to do things better and figuring out how to do things. So share as much as possible. And then briefly, we want to talk a little bit about the second part of our standard, which was not connected to grades, but it was the first time we were doing specifically looking at the three learner populations that we looked at. And what we found was pretty astounding. I think everybody agrees that it's hugely important that teachers are prepared to teach a diverse array of students. And it does not matter where you teach in the entire world, your students are going to be diverse and they're going to have diverse needs. Despite this, we found that currently the vast majority of programs are not providing preparations specific to the three populations we looked at. So around 70% of programs aren't dedicating 2 instructional hours to English language learners. Around 60% are not dedicating 2 hours for struggling readers. And while speakers of English language varieties is a newer area of research, at this point, only 10% of programs are addressing that component at all. So we think it's really important that this becomes a bigger part of the conversation as we move forward. And in the report, we provide some additional guidance and resources for programs, including links to materials to learn more about students who speak English language varieties. There are specifically some, I think Julie Washington is one of the great, Dr. Julie Washington is one of the great researchers right now who's doing a lot of advocacy work and research work to help people better understand how to support these students. And I highly recommend taking a look at those. And so I also have a few resources here for the specific to these different populations. I think the first one for English language learners is a more like a research-based, comprehensive breakdown of what research-based practices are that are effective for English language learners. Florida Center for Reading Research. I'm sure anybody who's in the Science of Reading Facebook group already knows about this, but it's beyond belief incredible the amount of free resources they have. Thank you, Allison. That's so excellent. And I'm definitely going to open that and look at it and make sure that I save all the links that you have there. MTSS for Success is great for multi-tiered interventions. And then for speakers of the English language varieties, I'm providing, I think, a podcast, a lecture, as well as a article that describes these students and their needs. And again, any resources that you have, please share them, and I will be providing these links for you guys when I share my slide deck out at the end. So return the conversation a little bit from our findings. We wanted to talk a little bit today about actions for advocates on the ground and what that sort of action can look like. So the message is clear, right? Most of us have the experience of going through some form of preparation to become teachers. And in that preparation, most of us did not get the instruction that we need in how to become effective reading instructors. So what do we do about it? We thought of 4 actions that we thought would be impactful for on-the-ground advocates, be them teachers or parents or anyone who is really invested in ensuring that every student is able to read. The first one is obviously using your voice. So asking questions, advocating to ensure scientifically based reading instruction is used in local schools. A big part of this is also just making sure that we stay afloat of the research that's happening, making sure that we have a strong background in it. I'm sure everybody who's on this call has listened to the podcast Sold a Story. It's a great deep dive into the national story of how reading instruction has taken place, as well as looking at resources like Reading Rockets or the Science of Reading Defining Guide to sort of have a strong background in what reading is and what reading should look like. Specifically talking about actions, though, one of the things that we think are a good idea is sending letters to universities' boards of trustees or your district school board, testifying at public hearings, advocating for professional learning and curriculum aligned to scientifically based reading instruction. We also think it's important to advocate for the adoption, both at the district and state levels, of curriculum that can provide systematic and explicit reading instruction to teach the 5 components of scientifically based reading. I think it's pretty common that students who are even at the highest quality instructional environments from the science of reading will graduate and move into a district where they are then being asked to adopt curricula that is lower quality. And that, I think, situation can be extraordinarily frustrating. And so that really requires people to be pushing at the district level for the adoption of those higher quality curricula, and even asking at the state level. And I think that that is a lever that maybe be underutilized, asking for state education agencies to be creating these lists of high quality curricula that districts then have to adopt. We also think it's a great idea to join forces with other advocacy groups, people who have already created a collective voice like Decoding Dyslexia or the Reading League, or other voices in your area that are doing a lot of this on the ground work and leveraging these bigger movements. And if you guys know of any local grassroots advocacy groups that have been impactful in your area, we'd love to hear about them. And lastly, advocate for local schools to focus hiring on teachers who are well prepared and committed to scientifically based reading instruction. And a part of that can be looking at the TPR and seeing if they are at least earning an A. An A doesn't mean that they're perfect, and it doesn't mean that they are one of the best reading preparation programs in the country, but it does mean that they are doing what they need to do and covering the core components of reading, right? So we want to make sure that when we're hiring people, we're asking them, like, are you committed, and was your preparation comprehensive enough that it would have taught you about the core components of reading? To help with some of those activities, we did create a advocacy toolkit, which you can find using this link. So it's a bit.ly link. You just put bit.ly/TPR-advocacy. And in that, we have a list of SEA leaders across the 50 states in the District of Columbia, and we've provided their email as well as a draft letter. And in that draft letter, I've provided a little section where you can add a little about your story, how the knowledge of or lack of knowledge may have impacted your story in terms of teaching, being a parent, knowing students who need to learn how to read, and why that's important. I think it's always super, super important when you're drafting a letter to an agent, like a state education agency, to add that personal touch. It just adds that little extra that I think can help get their attention. And then NCTQ has also created state profiles if you're interested specifically in how your state is doing and how the programs in your state are doing. And so there are links there to all 50 states. And as I mentioned previously, I do think it's important if you're engaging in this advocacy work to it's impossible to stay on top of everything. It's not humanly possible. But one of the things that we're creating in winter 2024 is something called the State of the States, which will essentially be a guide on how state policies related to reading have been shaping up and what's happening right now and what has already been passed. And this will be a great sort of easy way for you to see the state of reading preparation where you live, to get a good idea of what's happening on where you are. And what we're also going to be creating is a state action guide, which will be it's aimed for state leaders to help them guide their actions. But if you're an advocate, it can also help you sort of find your story and what you want to urge them to do. And so that will be coming out in winter 2024. So that is my spiel for today. If you guys have any questions, I am so happy to answer them. Feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A function. And we can do a few minutes of Q&A. One thing I didn't mention here, but might be of interest to you guys, is the different states that are doing great work and what that has looked like. And so if you are interested in different states that are really moving the needle on sort of basically on how they're looking at teacher preparation, we really recommend looking at places like Colorado, because not only have they strengthened the standards of what it means to provide teacher preparation reading, they've also created some accountability measures. So ensuring that programs in their state do what they've planned on doing, which we think is super important. Thank you, Donna, for another question. So I think another state that we like result in is Mississippi. But I think that there is some legislation in Ohio that is being, I don't know if it's passed yet, but Ohio has also been moving forward in that. There's like two levers we're looking for. One, ensuring that your standards are really good, and two, also making sure that you have strong accountability measures. And Ohio is doing an okay job in actually getting that done. I don't know a ton about Wisconsin yet. That's why I'm not on the state team, so I'm not the greatest expert on this side. But that's excellent. Santina Knight asks, is EBLI part of the discussion in any of the states? Santina, can you let me, I'm guessing, is that English-based literacy instruction? I'm not sure what that means. I don't want to make a wrong, and I don't want to make a wrong assumption, Santina. Oh, okay. Evidence-based literacy instruction. I can't say specific, actually, I can broadly say that most states are not developing policies that are hyper specific on any different methods of how to do things. A lot of the movement that we've seen in states is more or less putting down what the components are. And so I can't say specifically whether evidence-based literacy instruction exists in any states, but that's one of those things that I would highly, highly suggest you advocate for if you think it's extremely important. Because one of the general trends we're seeing is that states will make these laws very, very vague. And when things are vague, they're much, much easier to not implement at the ground level. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you, Santina. Any other questions? If you're super interested in the state level too, that is something I will make sure I link in the email to you guys, or the links to state profiles, because they go far more in depth into not only what states are currently doing, but I think there's a little bit of analysis on what the current level of coverage at the state level looks like. Because the accountability piece is really where we're seeing things falling apart. Because you can put down that every program should cover the 5 components, but if there's no accountability measure, it's very hard to make sure that that happens. Okay, I'm going to wait just a few. Is there a site that tells what each state has? So I believe, I think another organization may have done a state policy scan recently, and I will look that up and make sure that I have a link for that, but I don't have the top of my head. We are going to be publishing something similar to that in winter 2024, but I do think someone else has created something similar, and I would love to, I'll find that link and make sure that I link it to you guys. Yeah, I can't remember the name either. I can't remember the name either off the top of my head, but I will find it for you guys. Well, this has been wonderful. I am so grateful for your guys' engagement. As I said previously, we are going to be having a second part of this discussion on October 5th, where we're going to be talking to Linda Diamond and some teacher practitioners about advocacy and what it looks like. In the meantime, my email is cls@nctq.org. If you have anything, like anything at all that you want to talk about, questions, things like that, specifics about states, please reach out to me. A big part of my job is making sure that we talk to people and get our message out and answer questions and think about how we can be informative to the biggest array of people possible. So opportunities like this are super, super helpful for me. So thank you guys so much for coming. And we will end for today. Have a good rest of your week, guys. Make sure I know. Thank you, guys. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.